Just imagine it's the 1970s and the world ahead looks amazing. New technologies are coming out all the time, and one of them has enabled type, print, which is still incredibly dominant, to look better than ever before. Who's going to be there to take advantage of it? This is the story of one company that did. Welcome to the Middle-Aged Hack Channel. I am Stuart, and I am your middle-aged hack, just a child of the 80s trying to make his way through the 20s, and I hope that you will take the journey with me. Today, we're talking about the International Typeface Corporation, or ITC. It's another one of those companies that isn't really around anymore, but in their day, they were incredibly influential, and you could hardly go anywhere or look at anything without seeing one of their typefaces in use. In order to understand ITC and how they started and why they became as successful as they did, you need to look a little bit further back. Printing changed by leaps and bounds in the 20th century. When we started the 20th century, we were still basically printing all one way. There was only one way to print things, and that was to take a big mess of lead and smash it against a paper so it left an impression. You know, kind of like a stamp. That was it. That was the only way that it could be done. It was relatively imprecise, it was hard to do, and it was also super duper expensive. Around the middle of the century, people started thinking there had to be a better way. And there was. What came around was called offset lithography. And I'm not going to talk too much about it in this video because there's a whole video there to be made about what offset lithography is and how it works. But suffice it to say that it was a revolution. Instead of having this incredibly expensive chunk of lead going smash, what you had was a relatively inexpensive printing plate that it's very, there's a lot more to it, but I'm simplifying it. Basically went around and transferred all that onto a piece of paper. It could be done at a lot higher speed, and it could be done with a massive, massive improvement in accuracy. If you're old enough to remember mimeograph machines in your school, that's offset lithography. And as I said, I'll do another whole video on that. This one is about ITC, and ITC came around because of offset lithography. The way that you made a printing plate for the offset process was to take a picture of something, and then it would go onto film, and that film would transfer onto a photosensitive plate. It would be done very precisely, and then when it was all developed, what you had was a printing plate that represented exactly what you wanted to print. But you could do that with photos, you could do it with previously printed material, and a lot of times it was done, but when it came to the way that things were typeset, it opened up a whole new way of typesetting called photo typesetting. Photo typesetting used specific machines that had these long strips or wheels with different individual fonts on them. You typed in a line at a time, and some of these machines actually let you see what you were typing, some of them did not. And then the type would initially come out in this long strip that was just what you would put together, and your goal was to just line it up line by line by line, and that made your printed piece. That made the thing that you had to photograph. It may seem kind of medieval now, but the truth is it was a huge, huge improvement over what came before, not just in efficiency and accuracy, but also in cost. And most of the companies that were making type at that time were struggling to incorporate new photo typesetting equipment. You had new players come around, like CompuGraphic, that created whole new sets of typesetting equipment for photo typesetting, and you needed people to make fonts. Now, this is where the International Typeface Corporation comes along. The International Typeface Corporation, ITC, that's what I'm going to call it from now on, was started by a guy named Herb Lublin, who I've mentioned before in my video on Century Gothic, because He was one of the most influential type designers of the early 1970s and responsible for just so much of the look and feel of the 1970s. He started ITC as a way to market his own type and also bring really qualified and really kind of rock star type creators into one place. Lublin had this idea that classic type could be transformed and made new and look better than it ever did. In addition to creating a bunch of new typefaces, ITC also looked back in history and they found all sorts of great typefaces, mostly ones from ATF, the American Type Founders, and I did a whole video on that, mostly fonts from them that really needed just a little bit of a dust-up to make them look better. Lublin said, okay, I'm going to improve on what's there. He took a couple of fonts like Bookman and Caslon and Franklin Gothic and Cheltenham and reworked them so that they looked a little bit more accessible and also from a technical point of view so that they worked a little bit better on photo typesetting machines. And he did that with a lot of classic fonts, making all new fonts that were a lot more desirable to people at the time and created a lot more of that 1970s look. Photo typesetting also lets you automatically put alternate capital letters and lowercase letters in, and this allowed ITC Bookman to be one of the most flexible and desirable types in the photo typesetting age. I'm going to do another video about Bookman. I haven't quite done it yet, but Bookman's a perfect example of people just not understanding the assignment. And look for that video on Bookman. I'm going to do it in a couple of weeks. And if this is an older video, I'm sure I've already done it. ITC brought in a whole cast of new characters, including these superstar type designers that I was talking about, to create new fonts that really represented the spirit of the 1970s. One of them, and one of my personal heroes, is Ed Bengate. And people always mispronounce his name Benjouet or Benguat or whatever. I did for a long time. And I'm pretty sure it's Bengate. So Ed created a font called Bengate, and he also created a font called Tiffany, which was one of the really most popular fonts in the early 1980s. If you wanted to create something that just looked kind of fun and interesting, chances are you were going to be using some weight of ITC Tiffany. Lublin also was interested in new ideas. And he knew that he came in on a wave of photo typesetting, but somebody else maybe would come in on another wave and wipe him out. And that's where it really gets interesting. Photo typesetting as kind of an age, as a technology, really was only around for about 20 years. Compare this to lead type, which was around for about 400 years before that. But photo typesetting very quickly gave way to computers, special purpose computers that could do full pages of layout at once. And those were a very transitional thing because the next thing that came, of course, was the Macintosh and its ability to create quality type on a laser printer for practically no cost. At the time, the type wasn't as good. The quality of the laser printing was only about 1/8 as good as the quality of what was being done in commercial printing, but it was a start. And Apple itself had partnered with Adobe to create the fonts that were used in the original Apple LaserWriter. And Adobe then, for their part, partnered with ITC, which is why you see fonts like ITC Bookman and ITC Avant-Garde on the original LaserWriter, and then they kind of get translated over to Microsoft for the original TrueType, and all of this stems from ITC. The partnership between ITC and Adobe continued on. Adobe's head of type in the 80s was a guy named Sumner Stone, and another great type designer and hero of mine. Sumner Stone designed Stone Sans and Stone Serif and Stone Informal that were then carried by ITC as typefaces for computer and also for photo typesetting. So you can see there was this really good relationship between the two companies. Unfortunately, however, Herb Lublin called it. ITC and other companies that sold expensive type were really slow to react to the computer revolution. By the 1990s, you could use software like Fontographer to create your own fonts. And they, weren't usually that good, but some of them began to be quite good. And remember, everything was evolving super quick. Everything was changing so fast. And you had these small font foundries that were capable of turning out type very inexpensively. They had no material cost. It was all computer code. And so they were able to run circles around ITC and the amount of money that ITC had to charge for a font. I remember in the early 1990s, I bought ITC Serif Gothic from Adobe, licensed by ITC, and it was $300, which I'd have to guess is about $900 today. For just one typeface. I mean, yeah, it had a bold and a black, but I don't even think it had an italic. These newer wave of fontographers and typeface makers were able to keep costs down, and that really meant that ITC wasn't able to really continue as a going concern. A lot of the classic foundries either folded into other companies or just flat out closed during this time frame. And it's a shame because it means that some of the really great looking fonts from the 1970s just aren't available in digital form. Sometimes that's a problem. Here's a case where it is, for example. A slide that shows you what a movie is rated, PG or R or whatever, uses a font for that PG and R and G and whatever called Melior Black. It was designed by Herman Zapf, and I've done a lot more content about him. But Melior Black never got transferred over to digital, and so when you look at these slides today, it's just kind of this sloppy little trace of what those fonts looked like at the time. And a lot of fonts are like that. ITC was first sold to Letraset, which was a maker of rub-off letters. I'll probably do some video on that at some point. And then Letraset was sold, and sooner or later, all the consolidation took place. I'm pretty sure that all of that licensing ended up with Linotype, which is kind of all of the big boys, the last one standing. Still, the story of ITC is a great one because you had somebody who knew they were riding the wave, who knew that new technology was the answer, and also knew that new technology would be the death of them. It's an interesting story and it's an interesting lesson. And I guess that's where I'll end it today. Please do me a favor, like and subscribe. I'm trying to build this channel up. I cannot do it without you. Leave a comment, share this video with other people who you think would like it. And in the meantime, I will see you again on the Middle Aged Hack channel.